it seems like we've got most people have come in by now, I think. So what I thought Ross and I would start with was just kind of review what we did last year, what's been going over the last year, what some of the new things that have been developed, and then we can have a chat about the sort of projects we want to work on, and also the sort of events we want to do in the kind of patient level prediction field. So let me just, sorry, I was a bit mute earlier because I've got a new screen, so I was practicing to see if I could share my screen on one screen, but apparently when I do that, something else pops up on my other screen, so that's why I was kind of a little bit distracted at the start. But let me just share this screen back to my normal one screen. Let me go into the view mode. So hopefully everyone can. Oh, I do not want to be on this show.
Is Peter too important to join this now?
Can you see, which screen can you see? Can you see the presentation screen?
Yeah, no, we see the other one. We see.
Is this right now?
Now we see that this looks like the presentation.
Okay. So I've never had two screens before, so this is really confusing me. But I think hopefully it should work now. So just to summarize, we had 13 papers published last year, or maybe even more than 13, and they kind of I categorized them into kind of different areas. So we actually had quite a lot on best practices. So we were looking at the methods that we should be using to develop predictions and the impact that certain design choices have. So I've kind of called that best practices. Then there were 2 publications on reviews, 2 publications on methods that I saw, and then about 4 different clinical applications. So we've kind of varied some of the ones that are looking at how we should be doing predictions to actually some people actually doing predictions and publishing those models. So this is some of them that were published in 2021, and also some of the more recent ones this year. We've also got quite a lot of papers that are going to be submitted soon. So this isn't everything that was done last year. Just to summarize some of the stuff we've been doing best practices. So we have a paper that was looking at loss to follow-up. So because we do a cohort design, we have the unfortunate situation where some people may leave the database during the time at risk. So if we're predicting some risk over 1 year, you may find that someone actually is only observed for 6 months and then they leave. And a lot of the times we don't know why they're leaving. And so this is causing some issues because you don't know what happens in that 6 months when you weren't observing them. So we did a little study using some simulated data and some real world data to look at what was the impact. Is this something we have to be worried about? What are the different approaches to addressing this? And interestingly, we found that the main approach that we've been doing and the default approach in PLP was the worst approach. So we've now updated PLP to fix that. We did some stuff on like the design. So how you should be splitting your data in test train validation sets, and whether that has any impact in big data. This actually study was done because reviewers kept on criticizing us. So we actually did the design to see whether it was valid criticisms, and the results suggested that the design that we were doing was fine, and it doesn't really matter as much in big data.
What was the criticism, Jenna? Was it particularly like test and train kind of split over time, or what was the? Because I mean, those options were already there before. What was the general criticism they were leveling at you guys?
Yes, it's a good question. So people didn't seem to like us having a test set because the studies that were done with, I think, like 1,000 to 10,000 patients and like a small outcome count, they found that having this test set was unstable because you would only have like a handful of people with the outcome. So in the small data, there were studies that said you shouldn't have a test set, you should do bootstrapping. But in big data, obviously, the worries that they found and the issues they found don't necessarily kind of go towards exist in the big data. And we found that it didn't really. Unless you've got a very rare outcome, the performances were all pretty consistent, whatever. As long as you had a way of doing fair evaluation, so as long as you had a test set or some cross-validation, all the performance estimates were pretty similar. So this was just in defense because we kept on getting that criticism. Then the covariate look back. So this is some work that Jill Harden led. How the look back covariates 1 year, all time prior, 30 days, 60 days, and so on has any impact. she's kind of found that she suggests basically a 1 year look back's good because that's well defined. When you have all time prior, that's different for each person. Someone may be observed for a year, someone may observe for 2 years, and so on. So she found that basically 1 year was a good trade-off between understanding what the covariates are and also getting good performance. Design, case control versus cohort. Obviously, we do the cohort design, and we've not really been supportive of the case control. So we basically just replicated some case control studies, shown that they could have used a cohort design, and it would have basically given them the same performance, and it would have been a lot less fiddly and had a lot better calibration. Then we had impact of phenotype sensitivity specificity. This was what we did. That was presented with the COVID prediction work. This is basically almost ready to be submitted, so this should be done soon, finished soon. And then we had the framework for like everything. So we've obviously had our original PLP framework paper that gave you the framework for doing prediction. As in, if you had your like if you kind of go from how you go from the creating the variables to kind of specifying target population variables and then modeling, but we didn't really specify like how you create your phenotypes and how you identify suitable data and all that sort of aspect and how you can actually transport your model. So this kind of expanded what we already had to include all those aspects of actually making sure that your phenotypes are correct and your data suitable, and how you can actually share your model and such.
Sorry, Jenna, the question is for that last publication, is it transferring to another data source or transferring it somewhere else for the
So this one was just a kind of, it was the whole framework of like how we do everything in prediction. So it was how you actually write a protocol, how you create your data, like your phenotypes, and make sure your phenotypes work across lots of different types of data. So it was using some results we had where they'd looked at phenotypes for, I think it was like greater than 5, maybe up to 10 or so databases. And then it was like, okay, then we do our general kind of PLP framework from that. And then once you've got the model, it's basically how you create an R package so you could apply it to any new data in the OMOP CDM. So it was really how you could basically do the transparency and reproducibility in data that's being converted to the OMOP CDM. And then we did some methods research. So there was some work that was led by University of Pennsylvania, where they were looking at distributed learning, and they kind of focused on one of the COVID prediction tasks that we had developed. I think it was like basically some of the problems we had used the seat cover paper, and they've actually got a really nice method where you basically only have to share aggregated data, but you can get results as if you were actually sharing the real data. So it's a really nice method. So they've got this, that's a very nice methods paper that's just been accepted, just about accepted, I think. So that's a nice paper. They also got the preprint early as well, if people are interested. Then we're doing some work on ensembles. So we're looking at ensembles across databases. So if you combine models trained on lots of different databases, will it transport to a new unseen database better than the individual models? That's kind of in review at the moment. And we're also looking at ensembles within a database. So Chung-Soo had a nice paper where he did a stacking ensemble to predict death. And then Ross has been working on some work as well about seeing if we can use ensembles to get better performing models within one database. But I believe that you'll be testing it externally as well. Is that correct, Ross?
Yeah, so the idea is that you see quite a lot of the literature at the moment suggesting that ensemble methods have better performance internally, and I'm interested to see whether this will then carry out externally as well.
So the ensemble within the database is using different algorithms?
Yeah, so there's a few ways of doing it. So you could think of something like a random forest method could in itself be an ensemble, but what we're planning to do is to take 3 or 4 different algorithm types, so gradient boosting machines, lasso, random forest, and maybe some of the deep learning stuff, but I think that's still to be discussed. And then we've got, I think, about 4 different ways of combining them. So you can either just do a sort of a voting system, or you can weight it based on performance. And then the idea is to then test that and see how well that performs externally.
And Jenna, the second paper, ensembles across databases, what was the big takeaway from
There's
that?
quite a lot of exciting ensemble stuff in the works. So it broke up a little bit. My internet's terrible. What was the question?
The second one, ensembles across databases, what were some of the takeaways from that?
So generally we found that doing ensembles of models developed on different databases did actually lead to more transportable models, or more consistent. So you see a lot more variability in performance when you've got a single model. And it's a lot more stable when you've got an ensemble, which is pretty much what ensemble learning is the advantage of ensemble learning. But we also found that the calibration was still an issue. So you basically going to have a poorly calibrated model in general when you validate on a new database, whether it's a single model or an ensemble. So I think there needs to be some work to improve that.
But recalibration is relatively straightforward.
Yeah, so as long as you can recalibrate, then that's not really an issue. So yeah, if you had some data in where you're validating it, you could always just recalibrate. And that we also investigated whether you could do the stacking or the super learning, sometimes called, where you basically learn the combination of the models on the new database. But interestingly, that didn't do that well. And I think it's because we looked at it when you've got limited data. So actually learning a model based on all the single databases in the new smaller data actually was worse than just doing like the average prediction of all the models in the ensemble. But if you had enough data, then it actually did start to get as good performance discrimination, and the calibration was fixed because you're basically effectively recalibrating. But this one's still in review, so we may have comments and have to make some modifications to that. And then there was a couple of review papers. So there was one that was looking at the reporting guidelines, basically how well our models reported currently to enable you to reproduce them. And I believe the general message is, I don't know if Cynthia or anyone on this paper is on here, but I think the general message was that it's not reported well. But I don't know if there's anyone on here that was involved in that, if he wants to add a comment.
So I can add unless there's anyone else on. Yeah, so we were sort of we wanted to investigate sort of the impact that the tripod statement had on the reporting of prediction models. And you can see that although there were some improvements, there's still sort of a lot of issues with the reporting in general.
And then Anik led some work on understandable models. So she reviewed some of the methods that are there. It's a very extensive review, so it's a really nice paper if people are interested in reading it, just to see what's being done and how you can actually interpret models. And there's lots of different methods and approaches for that. Is Anik on here at all?
She's running the characterization session.
Okay. Okay. And then finally, the applications. So we had a few prediction models that were actually trying to solve some healthcare problems. So a lot of the times, people who have bipolar will be initially diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And sometimes that will actually get them given medication that can then cause the bipolar to appear. So we did a model here to predict a 1-year risk of bipolar for those who are newly diagnosed with major depressive disorder. So that's a paper. Then the uniqueness of this, we actually tried to create a simple model from lots of different database models. So rather than doing an ensemble where we just had the models and then you combine the predictions of the models, we actually tried to look at what was in the models, what variables basically were shared, and combine basically come to some aggregated set of predictors. Then there was the 90-day mortality after total knee replacement. This was kind of, I believe, a rather kind of straightforward application of the PLP package for this problem. I don't think we added any customization here. So this is we just had a problem of interest. We applied the package and we got a model out of it. The diabetes and heart failure, that one, I believe, has just been accepted. So I don't know, or has it just been published? I didn't know if there was a link.
It's been accepted, but it's not yet online. And that was a paper. So we used a clinical example of patients who initiate a second pharmaceutical intervention for their diabetes. And you see a lot in the diabetes guidelines that here they stratify patients based on risk of different diseases, one of them being heart failure. But in the guidelines, there's no specification of how you would assess whether a patient is at high risk of heart failure. So we built a prediction model there. And this also includes some methods research. So a method we're calling iterative pairwise external validation, which is when you have a network of databases, you can use them to sort of provide, we want to provide a context for the performance. So we train a simple model and a more complex model in every database, and then we do sort of a rotating evaluation. So you validate every model in every other database, and then what you can do is you can say, okay, well, this is what we think a baseline performance is of a model trained in this database, and this is how well an external model validated in this database performs there. So you get a bit of context about the performance. And we also included sort of age sex models, and so you get a context as well of how much increasing the complexity of your model adds to the information that you or adds to the performance.
So I guess I could have put this in the methods as well. This is kind of across two. And then the fourth one, COVID predictions. This is the work we did a couple of years ago. We eventually found a place for that. They didn't seem to like the fact that we used a proxy, even though we showed it worked for COVID. But eventually we got that. But effectively, we were using influenza as a proxy, and the idea this actually became more of a methods paper, even though it was an application for COVID prediction or COVID severity prediction. Effectively, we used a proxy because when you've got a new illness, you might not have enough people with the outcome of interest that you're trying to predict. And we found that maybe influenza would be a proxy. I think it was Chan who came up with this idea of can we learn from influenza, because we got big data for this. Even when the pandemic was starting, we had lots of data on influenza patients. So we tried to use influenza patients as a proxy, and say, okay, in influenza, who basically gets severe outcomes, and then we tested it in the COVID patients to see if it would transport externally, and it did seem to do well, although the calibration maybe wasn't perfect as you would expect. And I think that was the biggest criticism we had from reviewers, which is why we ended up having to make this more of a method rather than an application paper, even though I put it in the applications. It was originally intended to be an application paper. And if you wanted to add any comments here, Ross?
No, I think that was it. I think what was nice about that is also creating the simple models as well. I think that was a nice bit that we sort of started adding into the PLP pipeline over the last year or two. Yeah,
that's a good point. It's probably the first one where we actually used phenotypes as predictors. Okay, so those were the research that we've been doing. Then we've also had big updates for patient prediction. So the R package has had lots of changes. It hasn't been moved over to the main/master. Master's is the kind of the main branch that's now been renamed main. So if I say main/master, it's basically the branch that most people will be using if they install from GitHub. But when I move the current stuff that's in development over to main/master, what you're going to see is that now we have fewer inputs to the run PLP function, and the inputs basically now are settings objects. So we used to have all the settings as individual inputs into run PLP, which means you had quite a lot of inputs. Now it's going to reduce down to the main settings. So we've got a setting for how you want to define your covariates, a setting for how you want to do feature engineering, a setting for how you want to sample patients, split patients, do the modeling and such. We've also added in the ability to do custom feature engineering, custom sampling, custom splitting. So we've made it a lot more modular. Before, it kind of has some aspects of you could customize, but now we've kind of made it so that it's very easy to customize. You can write your own settings and your own like application function to basically use the settings object. And then you can now customize a lot of the different aspects in PLP. Hopefully you can customize everything that you need to customize. So you're going to have a lot more flexibility now in PLP. I've also made some changes where models are now saved as JSON objects. This was because previously models were saved as RDS or Python pickles. And when you're validating a model, so if I gave you a package that had it contained a model, it wasn't very clear what that RDS and that pickle really were. And in theory, it could kind of be a security issue if you're sharing models that you don't really know what these files are. So now we've made it as transparent as possible, and we save models as JSON objects. So you should be able to actually see what this model is by actually clicking open. You can look at the JSON object, and it should make it a lot more secure now when people are sharing studies and getting people to run their models. We've also add in the result schema for so previously you got your prediction results and it was just it was like an object that had RDS files. Sometimes it would have a CSV file. It was kind of a little bit difficult to view the results once you had them, other than opening up as an object in R. So if people were more comfortable with CSVs, it wasn't really that good. So we've changed things around a little bit, and we've actually made it so now you can save it as CSV, so it's a lot easier for saving the results, and also you can export those into a database. So all the results now for when you run a PLP can be put into a database, and that has everything. It has all the settings that we use to develop the model. It has all the results of the model, and you can view that through the Shiny app as well. So you can have one database that you put all your results for all the models you generate, and then you can have your Shiny app point to that database and view all of your models. And you're also going to hear from Ross in the next slide that he's been working on a model repository, which is an even nicer interface that, again, will use this result schema. So if you have a result schema, you could potentially use this repository website as well. We've also been developing 2 new packages. So PLP was getting very large, and we decided to take out the ensembles, put that into its own package, and take out the deep learning, put that into its own package. So you're going to see the release of 2 new prediction packages, one that's focusing on deep learning and one that's focused on ensemble learning. And then, as I mentioned just a minute ago, there's the model repository that Sika and Ross have been working on. I don't know if you wanted to add any comment to this, Ross.
Yeah, so this is, I think, people within the PLP community will have been vaguely aware that we've been developing this, but it's an attempt to build on top of the Shiny app. So I think if any of you use the Shiny apps, you'll notice that they can be a little bit frustrating, particularly if you want to put them into a sort of production environment. And so as a solution to this, we are building a centralized model repository for OMOP CDM or OHDSI developed patient level prediction models, where once you've sort of completed a study, you can push your model up to this library and you get all of the interactiveness that you have with the Shiny app. It's going to be a lot more stable and a lot faster, and we're going to also include the ability to download models and then the accompanying study packages. So what will happen is we're hoping that it will allow researchers in the future to go through and look for, say, maybe you're interested in a particular disease area or a particular type of model, and then you can go and explore those models and the results, and what you'll then be able to do is to download the model, run that model in your own environment, and then you can sort of re-upload the results, so it turns the models more into sort of a living object than a static object, or than a static thing that once it's been published, it's sort of left. So hoping to release that for the European OHDSI Symposium. And it's actually, even if I say so myself, it's actually looking really nice.
It is looking really nice. It's much quicker than the Shiny app as well. So it's a lot easier to kind of, if you've got a lot of models in your kind of database backend, it's a lot quicker to filter through and access those, and doesn't crash, which is the main nice thing.
What's the interface not Shiny anymore?
So we have the Shiny interface for locals, like development. So if you've done a model and you want to view it quickly, you can pop up your Shiny viewer still. But the model repository that Sika and Ross have been working on is actually a website, probably with JavaScript, I'm guessing, but I'm not quite sure how it's done. And then
I'm sorry, that's an OHDSI-wide thing that you're planning on, that you can anybody can submit models to it?
Yeah, that's the idea. And it's also going to be the kind of thing where if I start seeing people publishing papers and they're not, then I'm going to come around and try and get them to upload it to it, so that the idea is to just make everything a little bit more centralized, a little bit more accessible. I don't know if people on the call have seen the Tufts clinical prediction model repository. So sort of a similar idea, except there they have sort of the articles you can read and a little bit of information. And here you want to have a lot more interactive, a lot more sort of user-friendly, and really allow people to download and explore the models themselves, as well as sort of proactively exploring the results rather than necessarily looking at only the paper that's been published on them.
We're even going to have like in the database result schema, there's like a relationship, so it can tell you like whether 2 models are related either from some setting. So you're going to have this relationship where the models hopefully will have, you can easily see the relationship from one model to other models. And then another tool that we're looking at is protocol generator. So this is that we have our JSON spec that basically is used to know how we want to basically do our prediction. We've basically created some code that, given that JSON spec, it will create a nice human readable form of what your design was. If I have time, I could potentially show that later. I've got a demo on my computer. But what we also want to do is have it where sometimes once you've done a design, you may have to change it. So you may find that when you start looking at the data, maybe your outcome wasn't broad enough, or maybe you've actually made a mistake in some definition, or maybe you've made a mistake in the way you've defined your features. Maybe the features that you have aren't good enough, and you need to kind of create some new features. So what we want to do is basically have some code that, given your JSON spec and like access to a database or multiple databases, it will be able to look at some diagnostics based on things like PROBAS, which is guidelines for like, do you have any issues that may lead to overfitting effectively of your model, or bias, or some sort of like, are you basically using the outcome to predict the outcome? So we're going to look at these different diagnostics from that to basically give you an information about whether you have any issues or potential issues in your design, and you'll actually be able to update your JSON spec in your design using that, and then update your protocol. So this is an idea that we're going to be starting to work on the next month or two. There's already some code for doing the protocol, but we're going to add in this diagnostic stuff.
How do you assess the bias? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. How do you assess the bias, or I guess discrepancies or disbalance between the groups?
So this is a great question, actually. I was looking at PROBAS. So PROBAS is the paper that was intended for people when they're reviewing predictions to go through some points and just say, did the authors do this? Did the authors consider this? Is this kind of been done? And effectively, every paper that's published will have a high risk of bias from PROBAS. It's very strict on what it's doing, but it does kind of give you a lot of areas where you can kind of look at and be like, okay, if I'm designing a model, I need to probably be aware of some of the potential issues. So I actually went through PROBAS and just started to think about some metrics that could be used. But I think actually it could be good to have a session with an open session at some point in the future to actually get input from everyone to come up with a set of metrics that we think would be useful for us to use in this. So if people are interested, please let me know. Because right now it's just me going through thinking, oh, this plot could be useful, this metric could be useful, but it'd be great to hear from more people. But effectively, I was just looking at the PROBAS and thinking, how can we come up with some metric or some figure to give you some insight into the potential kind of area of issues. So like, how would you be able to look at your design for the covariate look back and your outcome time at risk to say whether there's some sort of issue? And one thing I thought was just like, if they overlap, you know there's an issue. So you could have a rule that says if they overlap, that's just going to be flagged as you have an error in your design here. They shouldn't overlap. But we could also look at plots where you look at for the features to the outcome, like the kind of survival plots or something, to see whether the outcome is like occurring straight after the feature, or whether it's kind of like, so these are some of the things I was thinking of, but this definitely could do with having a collaboration to figure.
Thank you.
So future research ideas, this is where I was hoping we could have a discussion of what people are interested in addressing this year. So I know last year there was some work on the health equity, so I wasn't sure if this is still an area people are interested in, and whether we want to look at things like making a new package for this. Like we have the deep PLP and the ensemble PLP, we could have some packages that would look into other aspects of prediction that we haven't got right now. New visualizations for prognostic models, as we mentioned, the diagnostics to estimate bias. So if people are interested in this is something that I want to kind of do some work on. So please let me know if you're interested in kind of coming up with some metrics and plots for diagnostics. And then potentially things like the transfer learning. We haven't really done that yet, but we've been looking at things like local models, so like a single database versus a global model, like an ensemble of models. We haven't really looked at trying to fine tune a model in a new database yet. So I think that could be an interesting area of research as well. So these are some of the things I came up with, but I don't know if there's anyone want to expand anything on suggest any other areas they would like to research.
Jenna, I had to step away for a second there, and I caught the last bit of what you were saying in terms of the some of the things that you guys were looking at with bias. That's an area I think one of the most challenging things in this area is the risk of just recapitulating the diagnostic process. So if that kind of fits into your diagnosis to estimate bias using the design and data, I think that's an area that it's really quite understudied, and I think would probably be one of the things that would move the area, move prediction in observational data forward the most.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think like for the diagnostics, I think it's just anything that you can do really with the JSON spec and a database or multiple databases to see whether there's any sort of issues and flag any issues. So some sort of rules that we can kind of come up with, some sort to flag like this is an error, or any sort of rules to kind of flag this may be biased. I think that's basically what I was thinking for the diagnostics. So yeah, I think like it would be good to kind of sit down, I think, with the group and just think about some of the metrics and plots that we want to do if we have a JSON spec and data. Okay, we are running a little bit low on time, so I'm just going to go to the other one as well. I want to see if anyone has any input on the type of activities that people would want to do to kind of do some collaboration. So we've done hackathons in the past where we've looked at something like we did the testathon, which was we basically hacked the testing to try and get the tests for Hades packages up to a certain level. We've done studyathons like for this COVID, where we got the seat cover publication from, where we basically picked a prediction task and developed models. We've done some tutorials, although I don't know if we've ever done workshops where we've just kind of sat down to discuss and review a problem. So this is something that I thought we could be doing that we haven't done yet. Whether people want to bring back the specific prediction meetings, because right now we've combined it with causal inference, but I wasn't sure if people were kind of keen to start having prediction done, maybe less frequently, but I was having a meeting that would just be prediction. And also things like whether people would be up for things like YouTube tutorials. So could we get people to basically summarize some of the best practices or the PLP package developments, or like the diagnostics and those metrics in YouTube tutorials for kind of the wider audience? Just thinking what people think about any of these, anything here that you think I haven't added, or anything here that you think you would like to be involved in.
Just kind of curious, do we just kind of speak out, or like?
Yeah, feel free to just start speaking.
I'm so shy and nervous here. I mean, I think it's all very great, and I think that looking into bias and measures and different ways to detect bias and whatnot and plot it out is very interesting also for me. As far as like activities to do, maybe so since I'm new, sorry, Jeffrey Sweeney with Rotterdam School of Management, assistant professor. I'm in information management, and I don't know, like just kind of hackathons and ways to brainstorm and just kind of absorb a better understanding of what it is how everything works, especially with the changes with like repositories and models and things being developed. Just that would help me to know how to contribute and whatnot.
Okay, perfect. You're the perfect person to answer, because I feel like it's the people who are new that it's harder to kind of get involved sometimes. So anything that you think would be useful for you to get involved is definitely what I basically need to know if I set up events.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think workshops, just having a chance to have some dialogue and figure out where things are at and where the next logical step would be to go from there would be great. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, I'm wondering as well, because you were saying that it would be good to have an idea of where you can kind of get involved. So I'm wondering if we should have a page somewhere where it's like things that need to be done. So maybe gaps in the research, gaps in the code, basically a to-do list for prediction.
You guys have like a charter of what you've done, what you're doing, so that I'm definitely not caught up with everything, and I do have ideas, but I wonder if you kind of went through that and either completed it or it was not feasible. One of the ideas reflecting on the phenotype February could be if there was one phenotype today, I think, with some of the comorbidities. I think it was depression and the eczema. I'm blanking now. I can go back and check, but to see if on the patient level predictors that comes up as risk factors for this particular condition. So kind of a fact check.
Yeah, I think like having like we don't actually have anything anywhere saying like what we've been working on. So I think that having like a charter to say here's what we've done, here's what we've learned, here's what we're doing, it sounds like a great idea. And then for the phenotype, you're saying you would like to use prediction to validate that. So Joel's been doing some work. I don't know if that kind of overlaps, Joel, or not.
Right, and I think it requires more thinking on my side to really distill my thoughts, but it is along the lines of confirming what factors or comorbidities you'd expect and seeing them as important factors from models and which models work best. Is it lasso? Is it, gradient boosting? Is it something else? But again, it might be not exactly aligned with what you guys are trying to do this year.
So I think like in general, I'll say we pretty much are interested in anything that's prediction based. So if prediction can be used, we're definitely interested. So Joel's he's been leading the work for the fee evaluator, which is I don't know, Joel, are you still here, Joel?
Yep.
Did you
the tool field evaluator we're using to basically kind of doing what you're saying is finding the comorbidities that predict somebody to that has a disease. So you'll see those, so in the model that comes out, the diagnostic predictive model that comes out, you'll see other conditions for, heart attack will have hypertension and coronary artery disease and things like that. So we have done quite a bit of work with that.
And that uses the PLP framework as well, right? So it kind of is one of those packages that sits on top. So do you have any kind of, I guess, do you ever present this, or like, I'm wondering, like, I don't know if we've really sold the predictions being used for this too much in kind of like the Hades meetings or not? Because I guess the Hades meetings tend to be focused on causal inference a lot these days, right, which is why I was wondering if people are interested in bringing back the prediction specific meeting.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it with you if you want to look at some of that stuff. The way that we're using the package to the PLP package for basically diagnosis rather than prognosis.
Yeah, it may be a good thing. So if we can bring back the PLP monthly chats or 8 weekly chats, I was thinking every 2 months, that could be a good area we can kind of talk about the phenotyping that's being done using the prediction.
Yep, happy to do it.
Okay, I see that we've gone over, so I don't want to keep everyone. It's probably like dinner time or lunchtime for most people. But if anyone has any other like discussions, but I guess like I'll stay on for another few minutes if people have anything they also want to chat. Otherwise, I'll let you go to your lunch and dinner.
Thank you.
Slide captures everything, if not, pretty extensively actually. One kind of surfacing idea is now going around the fairness of the models. If there's a certain race or subpopulation, I don't know if you guys talked about that, or maybe it's the first health equality piece.
Yeah, so the health equity is kind of the fairness. So Ross has been, I think Ross is. Are you the lead of the prediction health equity, or?
Yeah. So I'm taking the lead on that, and we're actively working on adding some new tools. The first thing we're trying to do is to add some new tools to just allow people to do these kind of assessments. So last year we added a tool to allow you to do subgroup analysis. So what you need to do for this is to make a cohort of patients that belong to whatever subgroup that you're interested in your database. So this could be, this could be a disease, it could be an ethnicity, it could be sex-based, it could be a combination of all of them. And then what it will allow you to do is to then simply run all of our analysis, but then for only that group of patients, and then for that group of people, and then you can investigate that. And what we want to start doing is to sort of broaden this out a little bit and add some metrics in, some more advanced metrics for looking at different kinds of fairness. And I think sort of the stretch goal of this is that at some point we want to start investigating whether you can actually train with the idea of fairness in mind. And this is where we're thinking of adding a new package that's sort of a sub package of PLP that will be a suite of tools to allow you to do this research. And that's something I think we're hoping to get kicked off in the next couple of months and really get going on.
Do you know when does this group, is it a group that you have that's meeting? Do you know when the meeting?
Yes, so I think they meet on, let me find it.
It's Tuesdays, isn't it?
Tuesdays at 8 Central European time, so 2 o'clock.
Yeah, 2 o'clock Eastern.
I think from this chat, I think I've realized that we pretty do need to have something somewhere, like basically putting all of the research work groups together. So I think what I'll do is on the GitHub website, I'm going to create a charter of like what we've been doing, what we are interested in, and also put all the links to all the work groups that are currently set up. And basically, if you want to set up another work group, you can always set up new work groups. So I'll put that information as well, because I think right now we don't really have any site or location where it's just easy to see what's going on and how to get involved. So that's something that is definitely shown from this chat.
Jenna, are you going to put your slides from this presentation somewhere?
Yeah, I'll see if there's anywhere. I send it to Craig. He might, hopefully he'll have a location he can put it, and then
because you have the links to the papers.
Get him to email everyone.
Yeah, the links to the papers would be great.
Yeah.
That would be a really nice. And I can volunteer for the diagnostics, Jenna. That would be, I don't know how much catching up I would need, but it seems like this might be independent of all these layers of developments that I'm not aware of.
And it's perfect. Yeah, so actually the diagnostic, it's going to be mostly just the work. What I've done so far is just reading the probast and then just going through one by one, thinking about metrics. So actually, yeah, you won't really have to have any knowledge of like PLP package for it. It's actually really good if people are interested, and don't be put off by kind of like the PLP package and stuff. Okay.
I'll ask. It may be something that's kind of the edge of what you guys feel is your scope. But one thing that I think would be useful, certainly for me, in terms of just kind of communicating what the vision is what do we think the roadmap is for getting these models into care? With kind of all the things that are happening with OMOP on fire, you can see all these different hooks that are kind of starting to form, but it's still not a non-trivial thing in my mind. You've done an ETL into the OMOP space. You have an EMR that's running in real time. What does it look like as what do we propose is the path, to actually using this framework to deliver on the vision of precision health that a lot of health systems are really trying to buy into. That might be something that, even if it's not necessarily something that's experimental, just laying out that path and that framework might be something that health system people who are kind of even kind of contemplative of OMOP might appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's actually the probably most important challenge we have, because we're getting all these models done, but then they don't really go anywhere. So it's like, we've got this model, it does something, but no one can really use it. So I think if we have some sort of framework for getting them implemented, and also kind of some framework for evaluating it as well. So we need some sort of way of actually saying, here's basically the point where it's pretty usable based on some metrics and valuation in the actual database or in the EHR. But yeah, I think Ross is going to do some work on that. I know he's kind of. I think we've had chats, and that's something I believe, Ross, you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing we're thinking of doing is just a sort of a literature review of, can we find models that have been implemented, and then can we work out why these ones have been implemented based upon that, to then try and get a pathway for, is it because there's some sort of really clear unmet clinical need, is it because they developed in some certain way, to really try to get an understanding of that. And I think it's also, I know there's a couple of, I think there's certainly a working group at NICE in the UK looking at sort of implementing more and more of this stuff. And I think it's going to be a topic of interest for the AMA and the FDA over the next sort of 10 years. So I definitely think it's something that we should get out in front of.
Yeah, maybe this could be a good area for a new workshop as well, like a work group. So this could be, I don't know how many work groups we have now, but maybe rather than having the every 2 month meetings, we should just have more work groups on these different topics, like the health equity, the how you get models used in a clinical setting, and that maybe the diagnostics as well could be a work group.
Yeah, one thing, if I may, real quick, like with all the different work groups and being new, the kind of relationships between the work groups and the overlaps between the work groups and the commonalities are sometimes, interesting to try to detect and figure out and navigate. So like creating more work groups could then just create more interdependencies and more connections and more overlapping areas. So I don't know if maybe a project-based approach, which would then involve the work groups that are needed, would be an alternative organization method for that.
So I wonder why would FDA, like the predictive models, where do they fit in the FDA interest framework?
I'm not sure personally. I know the FDA consider models, I think, devices.
Yeah, I would think, and again, excuse my naiveness, that it's more of a question for, like Mayo Clinic had, was it, I don't know if you guys heard of, there was a nurse study, it was a longitudinal cohort, or there were like veteran samples taken, just these long longitudinal studies where they've identified some factors. I don't know what was published on them, but it's more for confirmation if the factors are the same identified in these long run studies. And some of the Mayo clinical notes, there's been some work done there. I don't know if it's an OMA format though. But for FDA safety specifically, that might be a kind of a signal detection piece. But there's been some public data for for more common ones, so it's in a way already there. But I thought maybe some of clinical notes, if anything, or natural course of disease, some of the diagnoses that we see there in those description, that those will come up for the patient level prediction. Sounds like a lot of work though.
But yeah, I think when we're doing the kind of idea of how to kind of get these implemented, I think the regulatory kind of aspects would definitely be something that we need to consider, because I think that there are definitely things, like there's a lot of development in that area. So I know, like the UK, like as Ross mentioned, the NICE, I think it was NICE that they've got a lot of guidelines of like when is a model kind of suitable, and kind of like depending on what the purpose and the model and such. So I think that's definitely something that we need to somehow keep track of. There's so many so much development going on though. I think it's easy to kind of lose track of all that.
Jenna, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, any other comments?
I'm just wondering, like, so is it possible to kind of follow up and chat a little, just to kind of get to know and talk about like what the status is of the group and where you're going, like bilaterally, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear as well, like your input into kind of like what you think we're missing, in terms of kind of like getting people more involved.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah, it'd be very useful for me, because like I think like I realized from this, like we need some sort of website. We have a website, but we need some sort of page on that website that kind of has things a bit more clear. And we could even have a map of like, here's how all the workshops, all the work groups fit in together.
Mm-hmm.
If we have more work groups, but kind of like you said, maybe having too many isn't the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I'll email you then.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Jenna. And that paper on the diagnostics, if you can share it as part of the slide deck, that would be great too.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll be reaching out to brainstorm some metrics.
Thanks.
Okay, I will stop sharing.
I really am impressed how everyone works remotely like this.
It's hard. It's hard with bad internet, but yeah, I think we do pretty well, considering where everyone's all over the world. I think we get a good amount of collaboration.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much. I guess we're wrapping up. So I don't know where my video went, but
We can see it.
you can see me. I can't see myself. But thanks. That was really helpful and informative, and I'll keep in touch. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a
Thanks.
good Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.